What was that? Here we go. Okay, now it is recording, so let's do the thing we normally do here. Welcome to the virtual brown bag of today. Today is November 5th. Remember the 5th of November. Privacy disclaimer, we always record these videos so that we can later, share with folks who couldn't make it to the meeting. So if you are planning to sharing anything, thoughts or your screen, just, be aware that we will be sharing this with others later. So just don't share anything that could cause you any kind of trouble. But please don't let that hinder you from actually sharing your thoughts. What is this virtual brown bag thing? This is a place where we get together, we share tips and tricks, we share experiences, frustrations, difficulties. Maybe we are going through something that's pretty hard to implement and we found a way and we've done it. Now we're going to share with others who may come back to us and say, oh yeah, you can actually do it this other way, right? So it's to have a conversation around things and, grow our skills and knowledge together. We do this every Thursday from 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype. Everybody, is more than welcome to join in. This is a partial list of topics that we've shared. So we share a bunch of stuff, usually related to software development. But we really have been all over the map here with the things that we share. We have a virtualbrownbag.com website where you can always find the link to this meeting, as well as the link to the videos for the previous meeting, so check it out. And of course, a link to the Slack channel where we may be able to also continue conversations that we were having here, or maybe propose topics for conversations for an upcoming meeting. So definitely, join in and check it out. And other than that, let's get things rolling here. I see Tony has also joined in. What's up, Tony?
Not much.
Not much.
Usual Thursday thing.
The Thursday thing. That's it. One more Thursday in the books.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything to start sharing or starting a discussion on? Before I have one topic I would like to bring up, but first I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to, just drop something in here.
Yeah. So as far as I can't do video right now because again, no internet. But I could talk a little bit about this quote unquote GitHub hack that's going around because it's actually really interesting. And I investigated a little bit after seeing some tweets about trying to figure out how it worked. And it's actually pretty interesting because it gives you insight into how both Git works and then kind of what GitHub is doing behind the scenes. So the basic outlines of the story, and this wasn't the first time the issue came up, but this made a big splash, was that I think early last week there was a tweet. Well, actually, let me even set the context beyond that. So there's a software called YouTube Downloader. I think it's DL-YouTube or something like that. And essentially you use it to download YouTube videos. And the RIA doesn't like it because, they put videos up on YouTube and that if you can download them, then you're technically pirating content, but YouTube can't even detect it because it has to send the bits to your computer either way. So what they did was issue a DCMA takedown to the YouTube DL repo, the open source YouTube DL repo, which GitHub did. They took them down. So then people started pushing the just forking in and pushing it up whatever on GitHub, and because GitHub has a DMCA takedown order, they basically were telling people, look, if you do this, we're going to have to ban your accounts. Then some people did something interesting. So all of a sudden, a copy is, so this guy tweeted out that he had pushed a copy of YouTube Downloader into the DMCA's own repository with a link that you could where you could go to the DMCA's repository and download YouTube Downloader. So what the heck happened? Did he get hacked? Did he guess account passwords? And that's not really it. In fact, this is something you can do with any file and any repository that you have at any level of access to. Like as long as you have fork access to a repository, you could do this. So like, for example, I went and like did it to like a Google repository and and just when I was experimenting with it, I went and did it to the underscore repository. Here's the trick. So I don't, the way Git works under the hood, right, is it has this Git object store. So I've said this before, but Git in itself is barely a source control system, like at its core. What it is Linus wanted to play with content addressable storage file systems because everything to Linus is a file system. And a source control system kind of fell out of it, sort of, and then they've been piling layers on it to make it more source controller since. So at its core, you've got this object store in Git. Like that's most of what your Git directory is, which is literally like a bunch of, like all the files in there are hashes, and the contents of the file that would happen that generate that hash. So when you do a commit, when you add a file to the Git, when you commit a file to the Git repo, basically it stores it and it takes a hash of that file and creates a file in the Git object store with that exact file name and that exact content. A commit itself is also an example of a Git object. If you look at it, it's just like text that basically says what the parent commit was and then what files it contains, and just the hashes of the other Git objects in that commit. Which gets really interesting. That, by the way, is why you can't commit an empty directory, because an empty directory is not a file with a hash. It doesn't have that. So what seems to be happening behind the scenes, and like I kind of guessed this from the tweet, and then the rest of it was like me experimenting with it, is that when you fork something, you still continue using the same object store on GitHub servers as the original repo. You don't create a full copy of the repo, which like you do when you clone it to your computer where you download it. Well, you don't really get a full copy then either. But I'm not even sure if it's possible to do a full copy of the object store. Because when you clone like a branch, right? So it's like, okay, go to this branch. A branch points to a commit. It's just a pointer to a commit, and then every single Git object that is reachable from there in that big graph. So what that ends up meaning is that if you commit something to your fork, well, you know the hash of the file that you committed, right? It's you know the hash of the commit, you know the hash of the file you committed. That means if you go into the original repo, since it's accessing the exact same object store, you put in that hash in the URL, like you navigate to the view of a commit, and you place that commit hash with your commit's hash, it comes up in their URL. In fact, and you could do that like directly to the files as well, because the object store is the same, which makes sense from GitHub's point of view. Like if 1,000 people clone a large repo, they don't want to duplicate all those bits and bytes on it. They already have a content addressable storage system. Like the solution to that sort of thing is content addressable storage, which Git already is. So therefore, they'll just use the same object store. It just has this really, really weird side effect. What that means is our conception of what a repo is wrong, first of all. Because we think about what a repo is like, okay, that's everything in your Git directory. But that's not exactly true in GitHub's view of the world. What your repo is the set of all your branches and all Git objects that are reachable from those branches. The object store is technically not part of it, of your repo. And it does mean that GitHub has this bug where you could actually create files that appear as if they're part of another person's repo. And that one like totally is a bug. It could be used for phishing scams, social, maybe to bypass firewalls, social engineering scams, stuff like that. It's really kind of a nifty little trick and an interesting thing that you can do. I do think that they're saying that they're going to fix it now, finally, after saying for a long time that they weren't. But if you think about how you would fix it, like that's not easy, right? Because in order to fix it, like, okay, the easiest fix, when you fork, you actually get a clone of the other repository. But that's not really a good idea, because like then they're duplicating a bunch of information across their storage system and probably doesn't even work with the hardware they have. So like what sort of thing do they do? Like the system they have is not bad, but like do they do this at like the URL level? In that case, like whenever you access any URL from GitHub, it has to do a check about whether the object you're accessing is accessible from any branch in that repo that you own, which is just like a good amount of work, right? Because if it is accessible, that's a relatively quick answer. But if it's not accessible, you really have to search the full object graph. And even that is not a full solution, because there are totally things that I might want to be in my Git repo that I don't have a branch to. Like, for example, the commit that I had from yesterday before I force pushed a new one to the same branch, right? So it gets into a really interesting situation. I'll be interested in seeing how they fix it, if anything. But it also kind of generates the situation where you can make it look like you have pushed any files to any other repo.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what do I search for to like find some links on the issue, George?
Probably if you search for, well, actually here, I'll post some links.
To add to the meeting notes.
Yeah. So let's see. Let me pull up some links, because I was having a discussion about this recently, and I just need to pull it up in my Slack.
Sure.
So here's an example of a commit that I did that was like that. I'm gonna put that in the chat. But this is the guy who did that initial tweet post will sort of did this. This write-up, but it's not really a write-up. It's just an example of how to do it, and doesn't really explain the underlying idea of it. It's just the gist. But yeah, I should do a write-up of it eventually, but I don't have time.
Yeah, for some reason I'm logging into Skype on my other computer. For some reason on this one, it's not letting me alternate.
Yeah. Did we just lose Claudia, or did we lose me?
I don't know, we might have lost Claudia.
Oh, okay. So it's Claudia that lost it.
There you go. Now I'm back.
Yeah. Don't try to do anything fancy with Skype.
Yeah, it's not letting me do anything. It doesn't let me click on the chat window. It doesn't let me stop video or video or anything.
I'll put those links in the Slack as well.
Cool. Yeah, I just got to them. I logged into Skype on my other computer here, so I can see the links. Can you still see my screen share, or is that frozen?
I have it turned off anyway, so I don't.
Oh, okay.
Anyone else?
I can see it.
Can you see it? Okay. All right. Oh, what? Huh. I tried to pull up the link here, and on this computer it didn't like it. Yeah, but I'll add it to the meeting notes.
Cool.
Awesome. Alrighty. Cool. All right. Tony, John, anything you guys would like to start a conversation on?
I don't really.
The only thing I have to talk about right now is just like reading user stories, and then after you get done reading it, wondering what the hell you just read.
How big are these user stories?
It's not all that big. It's it's probably about 1.5 screen heights.
That's
List of
huge.
stuff.
A list of stuff? That's not a user story. It just sounds like a list of stuff.
No, there's actual text, and it's actually complete sentences. But just reading it just kind of comes across like the Charlie Brown teacher, wah 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 wah, kind of thing.
Does it explain why the user needs that thing, what they're trying to achieve at its core, outside of the software itself? Implementation?
It all has to do with agreements to like terms and conditions and things like that. So it's not really a very sexy user story at all, but
Sounds like a pretty straightforward thing, right? The user story would be like, as a lawyer, I want to make sure users understand our terms and conditions so that we can claim they hadn't gave informed consent. Done.
yeah.
Of course, do that is that's where the list of stuff comes in.
Yeah, I don't know. The other thing too is the way the code base is set up. There are a ton of projects for it, and some of the stuff I actually have the .NET Framework core or .NET Framework that I need installed, and others I don't. And it's just this wall of text that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The stuff JCJ and I were working on at the beginning of this year makes more sense to me than this stuff. So.
Oh wow, that's saying something, man.
So what do you do with stuff like that? I'll post that question.
You try to ask as many questions as you can.
Another thing is you could start. I mean, I would say there's a potentially good opportunity to test in which you're, because test-driven development would naturally lead you to forcing there to be concrete acceptance criteria, right?
Yeah. I don't know. It's there's an existing code base. It wasn't all written with TDD, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of suspect stuff.
Hardly anyone ever is.
Yeah. Be nice if there was some unit tests around some of this stuff, but there just isn't.
Start it. It's not always easy, but yeah.
You say, well, you could just start it, and yeah, that makes sense to me too. But you have certain expectations that, all right, this will take you this long to do, and it's going to take you longer to go through and figure out how to set everything up so that you can work, in a TDD way. I'm not sure that's.
No one says the tests have to be automated. I mean, they can be. You could start by writing manual testing criteria, which would still achieve the goal of forcing it to be really concrete with acceptance criteria and helping you really drive out the implementation. Like when a user does this, and this should happen. When they later do this, this should happen. And then so what you end up with tests that are text rather than code. It's not as good, but it still achieves that specific goal of getting shit straight in your mind.
Well, some unit tests are better than no unit tests.
Yeah,
I think. So.
I totally vouch for that as well. Many teams I work with, we have design sessions for each user story that we're working on. And then part of those design sessions, if we don't already have, we try to come out with some simple like gherkin statements, given this context, when this thing happens, then this is what we need to see as the output of it. And most of the time we don't know how we would be writing the actual automated test for it. But like George said, just going through this exercise of visualizing things from the user's perspective, the things that should happen, at least adds clarity. And then you figure out, okay, can I actually write automated tests for it? If it is, okay, what level? Is it going to be an end-to-end test? Is it going to be an integration test, a unit test? It doesn't matter, but at least it's spelled out and everybody's on the same page with what the feature is supposed to be.
And then make that all part of the cloud and part of the things that get tested by others as well.
Exactly. Yeah, this is how I've been talking. What at times I say, traditional QA folks. By that I mean the folks who are not writing automated tests. They're just running the app and clicking around and everything. So I work with them. I collaborate with them to say, okay, let's work together on writing out those given when then statements, right? Let's start pairing from day one into the sprint. And that way, they get into this mindset of setting, okay, what is the context? And usually it's like, oh, how do I write this given thing here? What is a context? I said, well, how are you going to test this? And then I'm looking for statements like, well, I need to make sure that I have a customer, and I need to make sure that I have a product that is active in the category of whatever, and there's enough, inventory, whatever it is. So those things will give us the context, and it allows us to actually see through the feature like that. And folks like collaborating like that, because like QA folks, they don't like when us developers, spend several days into the sprint working on something and then turning something over for manual testing at the end of the sprint. And they're like, well, how does it work? I don't even know what to expect. Well, if you have that conversation from the early days into the sprint, everybody knows what to expect when we're actually done with the feature. George, seemed like you were going to say something, or am I just breaking up?
You sound clear.
Okay, cool. Yeah, at times it seems like my connection is dropping here, so I don't know if I'm breaking up, or if you guys are breaking up. Weird internet days. And actually, yeah, go ahead.
I said I can hear you fine, but yeah, but what I just wanted to emphasize is kind of the connection between test-driven development and acceptance criteria, and also that test-driven development doesn't necessarily mean unit tests and doesn't even necessarily mean automated tests. It means writing the tests, which is establishing specific acceptance criteria first that you can follow. If it helps to call it, what was it, the thing that they were I think specifications or spectrum and like that. But that is just process that I find really helpful when I don't exactly know what to do with stories.
Yes. And this is something that the way I've been sharing this with people is on the differences between behavior-driven development, test-driven development. It's like, where do I use one over the other? What are they and all that? So the way I've been seeing it is I default to behavior-driven development, right? Where I focus on the behavior of the feature, not on the code that I'm writing. Once I flushed out, okay, this is the behavior intended based on the user story that we have, the acceptance criteria as it was given, because usually acceptance criteria in user stories come in the shape of demonstrate that I can see this. So I dive into behavior-driven development by taking those acceptance criteria and then identifying, okay, what are the scenarios for this user story? What are the given when thens for each one of those scenarios to understand, make sure that we know like the cases that we are coding for. Once we know what the behavior it is that we are trying to build, then I dive into test-driven design, not really development, where I think, okay, for this behavior, what is the public API that I want to see to implement that, right? So what's the code I would like to write from the users of that code standpoint? Like, what are objects that I'm creating? What are the methods? What are the parameters? What types of parameters? And then after that, I actually write the code. So this is how I've been like seeing it, and it's been helping me both just not having it clear for me, but also explaining to others. Because if folks get tied up in, is it unit test? Is it
Claudio, you're breaking up again.
I think I lost him again.
first or last? Does it matter?
There he is.
Hey, we missed most of that.
Speaks to this directly. So something I've learned a long time ago is that the one test fixture per class or per component is an anti-pattern, right? And then we switched over to context-based approach, where we create one test file, or one test fixture, or one spec file, however we name it. We create one of those per context that we are testing that behavior for. Now, whether that behavior is implemented by one class, by several classes, by one component, by several components, that's a different thing. But we focus on the organization of spec files, of test files based on the context. Now, I've been following that practice APIs and all that, but I tend to struggle when I need to do the same on the front-end part of things for React applications or Angular applications. That I see, let's say in Angular is, okay, you have, component X sitting in a folder, and then you put a component X.spec file, and then you dump all of the tests there. And then you end up having this one file that has like 1,000 lines of code, of test code. So I've been in the process of splitting those into an Angular app where I'm actually breaking it apart and creating like a context type of class that is shared through specs in that for that feature that actually share the same context, and then fine tuning it down to, okay, for this specific feature provided by that component, here are the different scenarios that it can be used. So then I have one spec file per scenario. Do you guys do any of that? How are you doing it? What are the challenges that you face when you do something like that?
I'm sorry, the audio kind of dropped for part of what you were saying, so I didn't. I'll leave it till I get the answer.
Darn it.
Yeah.
Did I break up for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, this is what it's like reading the user story I was telling you about.
This sucks. Yeah, so, all right. I don't know how much you guys heard of it, but so main point is one test fixture per class or per component versus context-based organization of tests. And I was saying for C#, I pretty much have that down. I know
I lost.
you expect to have component x.spec for the specs for that component. Do you guys get all that?
No, but I think I kind of get what you're asking about.
Okay.
No, you dropped out several times throughout that. So you're asking more about like how do you organize tests and kind of think about them, right? Both within your project and relative to kind of each other.
Yes.
Yeah. So
And
I personally do struggle with that a little bit, and organization in general, because and this I kind of realized that in the last 10 years, longer, 13 years, I've almost exclusively worked on greenfield projects, which is, I know, wild for people to hear, but that's just the way it's made out. I very rarely had to jump in on something which was already developed and in production and help to maintain it. So I've so it's really hard for me to see whether like whether other people would find the stuff that I've been doing difficult. Like I don't have anything to test my opinions against, nor lots of examples of other stuff that I can kind of analyze and see why it's difficult. So what I generally do is it's very much context based. While I do like to have tests, I don't have like a tremendous amount of tests, like maybe 100 or so. I'm not really touching in the thousands ever. Like, and so in the past I would have like a tests directory where I would try to kind of organize them by scenario at least. So just kind of high level area of the application and the general scenario from the user's point of view. So kind of the setup. And then beyond that, and then lately I've just gotten rid of the test directory and been writing them directly alongside all my other code because I don't really see a lot of reason not to do that, especially in like JavaScript and like Node.js and something like that. It just, or even not Node, even in front end code, like it just, what you're pushing to the browser, you're building with Webpack anyway, so it's not going to pull in the tests. Yeah, so I've kind of been shifting toward doing that, and tests and storybooks and all sorts of stuff are going directly in the code, in the regular code base, right alongside the code for the area that they're testing. And then I also try to organize my projects in a similar way, where like maybe like high level areas are maybe get their own folders, and within it I more or less try to organize things functionally ish by kind of scenario. which doesn't always work out, but kind of too. So one of the things I've started doing to balance that is just frickin' creating files in the same directory in a big flat structure, because I'm with my code editor, I'm using like a jump toolbar anyway, so it doesn't really matter a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then as that becomes like difficult to track through, then I take like a half day and move things around, which does actually get difficult when you're working with lots of other people. You find time on a weekend to do it or something like that. But
yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I need to. I'll be putting together some contents to make it easier to share these kind of thoughts, and then get feedback from everybody to see what makes more sense. Because I do not. I need to think. There are times, like for example, if I have one component, for example, that gives me a couple of features, and then for each feature I have different scenarios that go with it. So the set of the context for each scenario, there are things that may be sitting at the top level of the feature, others may be closer to the scenarios. So I've been looking into an organization where I have one folder per scenario, and they are all organized under one folder per feature. And then inside of each one of those folders, I have a file where I build the shared context for the files that live in that folder. Because that way, if I'm like creating some test data that is specific to that one scenario, well, it goes into this one file. If it is something that is really generic for all the scenarios of that feature, it goes to the top level. But I have one place where I set that up. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And now one thing that, of course, since this is something I'm currently doing on a Angular project, the way I'm leveraging TypeScript, I can have classes. So I'm building a context class that gathers all of this, like context creation and the sharing of certain steps that I may use in multiple specs for the same thing. So I'm toying with those ideas. Again, it's not, I haven't seen patterns or
Wait, say
examples
that
of other
again.
people out there doing something similar.
So you're using TypeScript and doing what?
So the tests are written in Jest.
Hate Jest, but okay.
So they are
Lost him.
Just when it was getting good too.
I know.
Yeah.
data that I need. What was that?
No, you dropped off like 30 seconds ago. Yeah.
That is horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll document
when are we
my
moving off Skype again?
What was that?
When are we moving off Skype again?
Yeah, and I wonder if this is Skype or if it's just my connection. Because again, yesterday around this time of the day, I was on Microsoft Teams and I was having the same problem.
Yeah, but those are the same tech. They probably use the same servers. I mean, Teams is just
well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. It was not just like on the communication tools. I did see like my internet connection all the time showing me, yep, it's it's deteriorating, it's dropping off. Now it's back on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, trouble sometimes as far as the internet. Yesterday, it only got better when I restarted my modem here. Sucks.
Yeah. I will say, so you said you're using TypeScript. I never build classes in TypeScript. Never. I use types a lot, but not classes pretty much ever. So I don't think in C# classes are. In C# classes are more understandable, but even then it's like, because there isn't this other more robust option. But I've kind of come to the conclusion that I don't like the idea of having. I like the idea of having structure and the enforcement of a contract decoupled from the actual thing that follows that contract itself. So the declaration of the context, coupling the declaration of a interface, I guess, but I don't interface with small I. So the declaration of a contract and the actual thing that implements that contract, I don't like that. So I think types and that whole system comes around with that kind of naturally force that split anyway.
Yeah, I gotta put together the notes and so that I can share with you guys how I'm using it, and then I can get some good feedback on it. Because right now I'm mostly like using it as a way to organize the things that are shared across specs, and it's very convenient where, you know, at the top of my spec I say, okay, I'm going to be using this context, which comes from this folder where you're sitting right by it. And whenever I go into my like describe blocks, I just do context dots, and I get like my given, when, and thens that are shared across those specs. That makes it very easy for me to see what's available within that context and to jump. Okay, how do we build this given again? Well, just jump into it. Oh, I see, and then pull back, you know. But then again, this is pretty much me translating like the way I do these things in C# to see, okay, if I apply the same type of thing here, would that work? Is it the best way to do it? I don't know, because again, when I look up, you know, context-based testing in for Angular apps, I don't find anything. So it's like, well, if I don't really find anything, I have to just make something up based on previous experience with other, you know, stacks.
So I actually have like a related question to the TypeScript stuff.
Sure.
So I was having a discussion with one of our instructors yesterday about the direction to take our curriculum. Ooh, and I have another thing I can talk about from that. So we're both on the same page that we need to introduce TypeScript. People need to start getting used to types while going through our boot camp. The question becomes like, to what level? So my argument is like, I need people graduating the program, going into interviews. You should be able to talk at least somewhat intelligently about generic types. Like that's kind of the bar. Maybe type unions and type intersections. Otherwise, like, I don't think you can pass the 101 level questions in TypeScript. Like, well, I mean, maybe like the very, very 101, but not enough to like demonstrate any knowledge that I'd be happy to see. Do you think that's the bar, or where is the bar? Would like to be able to demonstrate TypeScript, you can jump in and work in a TypeScript code base. Not that you're a master, but that you are confident enough of it. And Claudio's probably dropped again.
Now I'm back. Yes, I lost you like for 40 seconds.
Oh, okay. So you didn't even hear me.
Yeah.
No, okay. So what I'm asking is like, what is the bar let's say you're hiring someone to your team. They're not a senior developer, but you want to make sure that they can land in your TypeScript code base and work effectively in there. They're junior, maybe slightly mid-level developer there. What exactly is the bar? And my argument is that they should be able to, not have a superior understanding of TypeScript generics, but be able to have a conversation of them, understand their uses, be able to create generic classes, and maybe talk about like type unions and stuff like that. Do you think that's the bar as far as you, or no?
To be very honest, I don't know that much TypeScript myself to actually make that call.
Okay, well, what about C#? Would the bar be that they have to be able to talk about C# generics and understand where they are, what they're for, and at least how to create some open generic classes?
I think so. I mean, to the very minimum, yes, understand what generics are and give me some examples outside of, a generic collection of integers, of strings, of datetimes. Because there are so many things in C# ever since generics got introduced in C# 2.0. There are so many things that are built on top of it that people might use, like namely, for example, link, right, which is all over the place. And so I know that I've run into a lot of devs who know how to write their link queries and things like that. They are using generics, but without really knowing it to a point where they can leverage generics themselves, like they can actually create, their generic classes and their generic methods where it's appropriate. So I think, having at least a basic understanding would be the minimal bar there.
Yeah, so I think my expectation for somebody, coming out of a boot camp, with TypeScript is they should know how to, the fundamentals of what types are, obviously, right? Understand what a generic is. And then I would look, I would probably ask some questions around, if you're converting this piece of JavaScript into function, usually requires either an int or a string, how might you deal with that in TypeScript? I'm not sure I would expect everybody to be able to answer that question correctly, but I certainly prefer somebody who did.
It's converting it into a string and vice versa? You mean?
No. That's where you use your unions, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you say,
of course. Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people, that would be their first assumption, right? But if you come from a background where people are using that sort of thing, I don't know, I really haven't seen a lot of TypeScript code bases that came from people who are primarily JavaScript developers use the unions and that sort of stuff. So I'm not real sure if those are something that I would actually expect, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think for that you really need someone that's at least got an interest in type theory and has really looked into ML languages. And stuff like that.
Somebody who's coming from F# or Haskell or Scala, somebody like that. Yeah, absolutely. You need to know how to do that in TypeScript, right?
Yeah.
But somebody who's just coming, basically, it is either, a Node and JavaScript developer, or even somebody coming from C# and JavaScript. I don't see even experienced developers typically, understanding how to use those things.
I feel like type unions are one that it's just so both useful, and it actually does any library uses them. So it's kind of weird to not understand, not even know what the concept is. Because how are you using your tool?
I ever live without them.
Yeah. It's just like, how are you using the tooling that is then, dependent on all that stuff? But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to look at, I don't know, do y'all teach any of the frameworks in JavaScript or?
We teach, I mean, we mostly teach React. We teach
So
Angular.
it's, there's a lot of, if you're going to do TypeScript and React, you're going to run into that stuff at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, because how much of props typing is actually that? Well, it could be this or this other thing. And that's how
it's all over the place in React.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I would like a candidate to just be able to go in an interview and be able to talk about what a freaking union type is. They don't have to like be like, yeah, I can pull him. I know him, blah blah blah. I know him so well. They just can talk about it. That's my ideal. And then the other thing that I was going to mention that kind of came out of that conversation is, and I've changed my mind about this, and I'm now pushing for us to stop teaching Sequelize or any ORM. And I know that's going to be a little bit controversial, but man, like the ORM landscape in JavaScript is grim, and frankly, like to the point where I would rather replace it with a unit on code all the SQL stuff manually, and also create helpers for yourself. And I think that would convey knowledge, and then also like another unit on, or like a checkpoint where they have to use a migration framework for their final project or something like that. And I think between but yeah, like I'm just not seeing a ton of value coming from the ORMs, and I'm actually seeing them as being like a lag on development time, just because they're so buggy.
Yeah, I've never used an ORM in JavaScript, so I couldn't help you there. I generally don't use JavaScript on the server side.
Yeah.
I've never heard of a JavaScript ORM, but
so Sequelize is the big one, and it's fine. It's I'd say it's not. It's similar to like some Rails-ish stuff, but like it can do all the basic ORM things. But it's got bugs, and there's nobody working on it. It's got 100 open PRs and like 700 open issues last I checked, and it's just crickets over there. So I just don't.
What we were talking about a week or so ago about.
Yeah, Sequelize. But I mean, there's other ones. There's TypeORM, which people use with TypeScript. But you still, first of all, that means that there's like weird transpilation stuff there that like you have to kind of understand. So, and secondly, there's like it's still not great. It's still buggy. It's still not super high usage. And ultimately, like, I'm no longer convinced that ORMs are a good thing to teach to junior people at all. Because, like, it is a contradiction where we push ORMs, but we also say, like, well, you shouldn't use an ORM unless you understand what's going on under the hood. Well, a junior can't possibly know it, so maybe we shouldn't be teaching them.
I'm probably the worst person in the world to ask them this, but I would definitely teach people SQL first.
Well, we do teach SQL, but actually using SQL from an application is different from teaching SQL. I can testify. Like my thesis advisor in my grad program was like one of the guys who like did all the work on databases in the 80s and 70s, and like when I got my first job, like I knew SQL. I got the job on the strength of my SQL knowledge. And then probably realized I had never connected it from a programming language. Like the first assignment, I was like, What? I'm not just calling it from inside of a window in the database manager. Oh boy. And I have never used a having clause since.
Yeah. I've
So,
used
like,
one of
like,
those once in real programming.
What was that?
I've used one of those once where I like
Right.
really needed it.
Yeah, right. It's like, I want a group by, but then like an extra group by. Oh, that's right. Yeah. All right, we're at the hour. Claudia, are you still there? Or are you fully dropped?
I am, but it keeps dropping like 10 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to drop off, guys. Enjoyed it.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a
Everybody.
good one, guys.
Good stuff.
Bye. Bye,
Yeah,
Claudia.
you too. Hope the record comes through. Bye.